You think you're prepared for the end of the world. You've watched the movies, read the books, maybe even stockpiled some canned beans in your basement. But here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to admit. If a nuclear winter actually happened, almost everything you think you know about survival would be completely useless. Welcome back to Human vs. Survival, where today we're exploring why you, and honestly most of humanity, would not make it through a nuclear winter. And trust me, this isn't about being pessimistic. This is about understanding the reality of what you'd actually face. Let's start with something most people don't even think about: the sun. Imagine waking up tomorrow and the sky is just gone. Not cloudy, not overcast. Gone. A nuclear winter doesn't happen because of the explosions themselves. It happens because of what comes after. When nuclear weapons detonate, they don't just destroy cities. They launch massive amounts of soot, ash, and dust particles so high into the atmosphere that they create a blanket so thick that sunlight can barely penetrate it. We're talking about a reduction in solar radiation by up to 90% in some regions. For months, maybe years, your eyes would adjust to a perpetual twilight. And that's when the real problems begin. Within weeks, global temperatures would plummet. We're not talking about a mild winter. We're talking about a drop of 20 to 30 degrees Celsius in most places. Agricultural zones would shift dramatically. Crops would fail worldwide, not just in the affected regions. The global food supply chain would collapse instantly, and here's where your survival instincts completely fail you. You cannot hunt, farm, or forage your way out of this. There wouldn't be enough wild game to feed even a fraction of the population. The animals themselves would be starving. The plants would be dying. You'd be competing with millions of other desperate people for resources that simply don't exist in sufficient quantity. But let's say you're one of the lucky ones who managed to stockpile food. Let's say you have a bunker with enough supplies to last a year, maybe two. What happens after that? This is where people's survival fantasies completely fall apart. You'd need to grow food indoors under artificial light, which requires electricity, massive amounts of electricity. If the nuclear war was widespread enough to trigger a nuclear winter, the power grid would be devastated. You'd need solar panels. But remember, there's barely any sunlight. You'd need a generator, but fuel would be impossible to obtain and would eventually run out. You'd need seeds, but most seeds require specific light and temperature conditions to germinate. Seeds that evolve to grow in normal sunlight don't suddenly work in a nuclear winter. You'd be trying to grow food in conditions that are fundamentally incompatible with agriculture. Let's talk about water for a second, because this is another place where people's plans completely crumble. You might think you can melt snow or collect rainwater, but here's what you don't realize. The precipitation in a nuclear winter wouldn't be clean. It would be contaminated with radioactive fallout, heavy metals, and toxic compounds. You'd need advanced filtration systems to make it safe. And again, those systems require electricity, replacement filters, and maintenance. Most people's survival plans involve boiling water over a fire. That works for bacteria and parasites, but it does absolutely nothing for radioactive contamination or chemical toxins. You could be slowly poisoning yourself with every drink. And then there's the psychological component, which might be the most devastating of all. Imagine living in near total darkness for months. Imagine knowing that the world as you knew it is gone. Imagine the constant fear, the claustrophobia if you're in a bunker, the desperation as your supplies dwindle. Humans aren't built for this. Depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation would skyrocket. People living through a nuclear winter wouldn't just be fighting for physical survival. They'd be fighting an enemy inside their own minds that might be even more lethal than starvation. Here's something else that keeps most people alive: community and trade. But a nuclear winter would shatter that. Governments would collapse. Currency would become worthless. The rule of law would disappear. You wouldn't be dealing with other reasonable people trying to survive together. You'd be dealing with desperation on a scale that's almost incomprehensible. Violence would become commonplace. Resources would be hoarded violently. Trust would evaporate. The social structures that keep civilization functioning would disintegrate, and humans are surprisingly terrible at rebuilding them quickly. Let's also consider disease. In a post-nuclear winter world, medical infrastructure would be completely destroyed. There would be no hospitals, no antibiotics, no vaccines. Even a minor infection could become life-threatening. And with malnutrition, cold, and stress suppressing everyone's immune systems, infections would spread like wildfire. Diseases that we've eradicated or controlled for decades would return with a vengeance. You could survive the initial catastrophe only to die from something as simple as pneumonia or an infected wound. The harsh reality is this: a nuclear winter isn't a survivable scenario for most people, not because they lack willpower or preparation, but because the conditions themselves are fundamentally incompatible with human survival at scale. It's not like a hurricane or an earthquake where infrastructure can be rebuilt and life can eventually resume. It's a complete reset of the planet's climate and ecosystem. It's a scenario where even the best prepared individuals would face challenges that have no real solutions. So what's the takeaway here? It's not that you should give up or stop preparing for emergencies. It's that you should understand the difference between realistic preparedness and fantasy. Focus on scenarios that are actually survivable: natural disasters, economic collapse, temporary supply chain disruptions. Prepare for those. Build community connections. Learn practical skills. But understand that some scenarios are so catastrophic that individual preparation, while admirable, can only take you so far.